Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to paint an African elephant in watercolor using only 4 colors. The first color that you're going to use is yellow ochre. The second color is cobalt blue. The third color is Paynes Grey. And the fourth color is burnt umber. So let's begin. Firstly, I sketch in my sketchbook so that I can actually determine the shape of an elephant, and this helps with my eye-hand coordination. Sketching is a very big part of my art making process, and I use a 2B and 8B pencil from the Montmartre range or from Faber-Castell. And as you can see, I am just quickly shading in the light and dark areas so that I can understand the shape of an elephant and that I can get its proportions right. I think that's very important, especially if you're painting, that you understand the structure and the bone structure of an animal as well as the skin, etc. So I'm just lightly then smearing in and blending some of the color, just so that I can get the light and dark shadows as well and understand how they all work. So that's the first step. Then I choose a watercolor paper and I sketch out everything and start painting. I've started with brown umber and now I'm adding in some colors such as yellow ochre in the light areas, and in the darker areas then I'm putting down cobalt blue and going over it with the Paynes Grey. I use a wash over the bottom layer of paint and I add in using a wet in wet technique or wet on dry paper, and then I wait for everything to dry. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to work over this layer of paint. I'm carefully adding in the yellow ochre in the lighter areas, because an elephant isn't white, so I will leave some very small areas of white on the elephant, but I will use the yellow ochre as my lightest tonal value on the elephant, and I use water to lighten certain areas as well. I blend in the paint. I'm using Paynes Grey in my darker areas, just using it as to get the structure of the face of the elephant, because it has quite a few shadows on its face and it's got quite a bony face, so there's a lot of actually light and dark shadows and highlights on an elephant's face. I'm just using Paynes Grey and I'm just darkening some of the areas. I go over the cobalt layer with some more Paynes Grey so that those shadow areas can get really, really dark. I'm just adding in some of the details now because they're very wrinkly. The African elephants have got a lot of wrinkles on them, and their skin's actually quite rough and hard, and it's got lots of hairs on it. I'm now adding in some shadow there around the eye. I'm using some Paynes Grey. I'm just darkening the eye because sometimes when watercolor dries, it dries much lighter than when it is wet. So you have to go back and work in those areas and layer them so that you get the really dark effects and areas. I'm just adding in some shadow there because just around the face there's a lot of shadow going into the ear. I'm just adding some more color on my brushes. I'm using a naught, triple naught, or I think it's even a double naught brush. I use the Montmartre brushes because they've got these lovely handles which actually make it easier to handle very thin or very small brushes. I'm just lightly adding in the shapes and the shadows, and actually it's almost like I am creating a 3D effect on a 2D piece of paper. So by adding in the shape and the colors, you can actually mold the face on the actual watercolor paper. I'm using a wet and wet technique there, and I'm now using burnt umber, and I'm lightly going over the other paint and areas, and I'm using a light wash. Because I'm using such a small brush, I have to regularly add water to it, so that there's always a lot of water on the brush. If you have bigger brushes, it's much easier. The brushes hold more water, so you don't have to actually dip the brush in the water too much. But because I'm using such a small brush, I have to regularly dip it in the water. I sometimes don't even put paint on the brush. I just use water directly on and over the actual paint, so that I can even lighten some of the areas. I'm now putting in some Cobalt Blue over the wrinkles that are on the ear, and I'm putting in a lot of water. As you can see at the top, I'm putting a light wash in, and then I'm smearing some of the paint back in over the actual yellow ochre. And be careful, when you put a blue and a yellow over each other, they can create green. So that is something you have to be very careful of, and that's why I use Paynes Grey over some of the areas of the yellow ochre and the cobalt blue, so that there isn't any green coming through. I'm now using burnt umber, and I'm using a light wash there of just water, and I'm coming back in there with the wrinkles, and I'm using the burnt umber now. So I'm only using 4 colors to create this elephant. You do not have to have a whole lot of colors to create animals, especially in watercolor. You can actually use a very minimal palette, and that's what I wanted to show you here, is that you can use those few colors to actually create a beautiful wildlife artwork. I do take out some of the pencil marks, because the pencil does show through on the watercolor, and you cannot actually rub it out after you've put paint over the pencil. So in certain instances, I actually do take the pencil lines out, because they can also interfere with the highlights that I'm trying to create there, and some of the white areas that I'm leaving open. I'm now adding in some yellow ochre, and I'm just lightly adding it in down by the trunk. And I am using a reference photo, so that I do actually understand and can see the light and dark areas of the trunk. And I try to observe, be very observant of the lines, whether they are semicircle. You can see they're very small semicircles that I was using there. I'm adding in more yellow ochre there, and just trying to get the light and dark areas. And I'm having a look at some of the really dark areas, and I'm actually not highlighting, but I'm actually going back and working over them, because as it dries, it gets lighter. So sometimes you lose the shadow areas, and you have to come back and work over them, and that's what I do. I continually work certain areas, and as you can see, I'm now adding in really dark shadow that's on the left hand side of this elephant. And I've got quite a bit of paint on the actual paintbrush. And then what I like to do is take a bit of water and just smooth it out or blend it back in, so that there aren't any harsh lines. Because when watercolor dries and there's a lot of harsh lines, you can lose the effect of blending or the softness that you want to create in a watercolor. And that's why I try to take some water, and I actually go back and put a water wash over an edge just to soften it. I'm not just darkening the eyes of the elephant. I'm using a light wash, just some water actually and smoothing out some of the paint that's already on the paper. I'm going to work that left eye now, and I'm going to carefully add in some of the wrinkles that are around the eye, because I actually have quite a few wrinkles around the eye as well. I'm just carefully working on the edge there of that bone that's by the eye, adding in just a few details, and then I am doing a light wash over that eye because the eye is in shadow. So I do want to actually create that shadow effect there, because then you can actually, it can actually make the bone structure stand out if you have a light and a dark area right next to each other. I'm coming back in and I'm working that ear and just adding some ultramarine, not ultramarine, burnt umber there. And I'm just smoothing it out with water so that there isn't a hard edge there. I want the ear to actually look like it's flapping over a little bit, so I actually just use water to smear out the color. Okay, and I'm just going back in with Cobalt Blue and also some burnt umber, and I'm just now working on those fine details, those little wrinkles that are on the ears. I'm really defining them now. They are quite defined on an elephant. I mean, that's what actually, that's part of the ear of an elephant, are these little wrinkles and flaps that appear on the actual ears. And so I am just adding them in there. I'm working from the edge up into the back into the ear. As you can see, it's actually starting to define the ear, and it's starting to look a little bit more like an ear now, and not just wishy-washy area over there. And in the African sun, it's very bright, so it casts a lot of shadow. So a lot of the animals have this really stark, dark and light, shadows, especially during midday. So the time of day is also important, and that will determine where the shadows are. So it's on the top right side, that will be where the sun is coming down and it's hitting the top of the elephant, for the shadow on the right side, and the shadow will be on the left side of the elephant. And I'm very aware of that. Always be aware of where your shadows are, your light and your dark. These contrasts really help when you are drawing or you're painting an animal. And so I waited for that to dry, and I've worked back some of that in there. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and become one of my followers there. Thank you.